All right, we are live. Everyone, welcome to Logistics of Marketing, the branding episode. Today we have Blythe and Paul with us, the FreightCaviar and Digital Dispatch. So before we dive in, guys, let me just kind of set some groundworks, right? Why does Logistics of Marketing exist? Okay, so we started Logistics of Marketing a few months back because really we had a passion of bringing perspectives from the industry together around some key topics that continue to bubble up and come to the surface. So, one of those topics today that we're discussing is branding. Branding has become ever important in our landscape, whether you're a freight tech company to a 3PL. As our industry evolves, branding is one of those words that we hear a ton. So, we brought Blythe with us and Paul. So, why don't you guys give us a quick intro, starting with Blythe. Who are you and what's your background?
Sure. So a little bit of my background is about 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago, I worked as an executive assistant at a 3PL. I had a sports and entertainment blog on the side. And when my boss found out about what I was doing, he asked me to handle all of their marketing and website development. So that was sort of my crash course into 3PL asset-based marketing, really in the early stages. And we were the second logistics company ever on HubSpot's platform. So very, very new. But all of those skills learned all that time ago has led to my role today, business owner of digitaldispatch.io. I help companies get online and grow. So from marketing strategy to also building out websites and making sure that they look pretty and they function.
There we go. That's awesome. And Paul, give us a background, man.
Sure. So I grew up in Chicago, graduated U of I in 2015. My buddy got me a job working for a freight brokerage in Lincolnwood. Worked there for a year. Then I transitioned to Everest out in Evanston. And Everest sent me out to Ukraine. So I opened up an outsourced freight brokerage in Ukraine. Spent 3 years of my life there. A year and a half ago, I quit my job and moved to Poland. That's when I started FreightCaviar. I've had some cool success with FreightCaviar, and I've just been having fun with it. I just recently accepted the head of content marketing position at Warp.
Awesome.
So I'm doing that alongside FreightCaviar.
Wonderful. Cool. And then Nick, why don't you give an intro?
Yeah, so I'm Nick, one of the co-founders of Kinetic, and we are basically consulting, but for freight tech companies. Our deal is we help tech companies get their products to market more quickly and with better adoption, basically offering fractional support services in sales, marketing, and customer success.
Wonderful. And I'm Zach Ramirez. I'll be hosting this episode today. And I work for a company called Dexia, and we are a full service marketing agency that kind of bridges the gap between, freight companies, 3PLs, freight tech, and getting into marketing and understanding it and diving in. So what's really cool about today is we have so many different perspectives in the room, and I'm really excited to dive in and talk about branding because it really is an important topic that bleeds into growth strategy, marketing strategy, even personal branding and how that should be looked at. So Nick, why don't you give us a little bit of the landscape, and then we'll dive into some questions with Blythe and Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. So like Zach said, today's topic is branding. And personally, I feel like branding has always been an important topic in logistics. I mean, there are certain companies who have done such a good job that, like, if you see a rhino on a shirt, you know exactly what broker you're talking to. If you see an orange trailer driving down the road, you know exactly what carrier that is. If you see a guy with an orange shirt and a backwards hat doing a podcast, you got a pretty good idea who's doing that podcast too. But branding is about a lot more than just colors and logos. And today we're going to dive in a bit deeper and hopefully give people some actual actionable takeaways.
Yeah.
So to kick things off, Blythe, we'll throw the first kind of broad question out to you and bounce around. Like, what is branding and why is it important?
I think that's sort of the common definition of branding is what people say when you're not in the room. But I think that branding is sort of a conscious decision that you make yourself. And it might take a while to get there. But from my process of creating content over the last, 10 plus years has been to define 3 to 4 buckets of content that I want to be known for. And that's, content marketing, and that's website design, and, I'm blanking on the other two, but those 4 different content buckets of what I want to be known for, content marketing being one of them, that's what I try to focus primarily on. And I realize that those 3 things, you can go very deep on each of those 3 topics, and you could go deep on them for a very long time. And as far as sourcing what you're going to talk about online, because that's also an important aspect to it, because if you're not talking about the things that you want to be known for, then you can't really build a brand that is a real business out of that in order to generate revenue. I mean, there's other social media platforms that you can talk about your favorite foods and, your favorite artists and things like that. And you might be able to make a little bit of money in that regard. But when you start getting into the B2B space and start getting into, some of the markets that we find ourselves in, you really have to be known for really probably 2 to 3 things, 4, I would say max. So that's what branding means to me.
Love that. Awesome. Paul, what about from your perspective? What does branding mean to you?
It's interesting because I never graduated from a marketing degree. This is my first official job doing marketing. But for me, branding is having what do you want to associate with? What do you want your company to associate with? So for me, FreightCaviar, it's humor. It's kind of entertainment for the industry. So when people hear FreightCaviar, they're most likely going to be oh, it's something, to put a smile on their face. They might smile, they might be happy about it. It's interesting because I actually just put out a clip from my talk with the freight coach at the TIA conference, and he's got the whole brand image, like you said, Nick, with the backwards trucker hat, the orange Under Armour polo, and it's just so easy to associate those things with him. And when you see him at TIA, he just sticks out. Everyone could see that that's the freight coach. And so with branding, I would say it's important to associate your company with something specific. I know some companies like to associate themselves as being happy, or this might not be logistics related, but just kind of easygoing. And that's kind of where I would take branding. That might not be the correct definition, but it's the way I see it from my lens. So I would say definitely you should choose maybe some kind of associations, whether it's being educational in logistics or being entertaining in logistics, or and have people when they hear your name, your brand, they know right away that this is what you're talking about. This is the subject. So that's the way I see it.
Yeah, it is so interesting because I feel like this word branding, right, it is so relative both to the industry or even the spaces, right? Whether you're B2B or B2C, branding takes a different shape and form, right? So, something, that, Nick and I have talked about in the past is in marketing, right? We have words, we have visuals, we have sound. So shouldn't branding be how people see you, understand you, and hear you, and what it makes them feel afterwards? So I think it'll be fun to dive into some of those nuances today, in even how it relates to how we've experienced branding in the space. So that's really cool. So kind of in that same vein, Blythe, I'd like to ask, brand identity, right? It's a word that we hear, right? How do we identify with a brand? How do we even start shaping that? So, as maybe even as you've launched Digital Dispatch, right? What are some of those things? What are some of the questions that you ask when trying to shape your brand identity?
Oh, that's a good question, because I feel like it's something that takes so long to figure out, and a lot of people, especially when you're building a website, because when you're building a website, I was just talking to somebody yesterday who's a freight broker or a freight agent, and he is crafting the messaging for his new website, and he's getting really intimidated and almost in his own head that he feels like he has to know exactly who he is right now. He has to have that business plan mapped out for the next 5 years, because he has to take all of that insight and then put it onto his website. And I think too often we find ourselves in a place where we're overthinking it. And I think that that is one of the more challenging things about trying to identify what your voice is going to be. But there's sort of just 3 frameworks that you can sort of work around when you want other people to know about what you stand for. And one of those frameworks is called the Klt Method. And that's what your knowledge, what you like and love, and then also the trust factor. So where you're vulnerable. So having that framework, then you can fit in what your voice is going to be, whether it's entertainment, whether it's educational, whether it's inspirational. So those 3 main topics that people resonate with, filtering that into, a framework like the Klt Method, where 70% of what you post online, and these don't have to be exact numbers, but 70% of what you post online is within your knowledge bucket of what you know and what you want other people to take away from. Then the 20% is what you like and what you love. So that makes you relatable. So for example, with me, like I'm a big Jaguars fan, and, to a fault, I love that team. And so I try to talk about them not a lot, which is kind of challenging as a former sports broadcaster. But then the 10% of the time are when I'm vulnerable. So when, this is how I messed up with this thing, what you can learn from my mistakes. So thinking about it in, that framework that helps you to craft, kind of funnel the messages that you want to talk about, and then into a framework that, and like I said, it doesn't have to be exact science, but as long as, the majority of the messaging that you're sharing falls within that knowledge bucket of what you want other people to be made aware of, I think that that's how you figure out your voice along the way. It's not something that I think that you have it all figured out right away, even right now, but it could be something, in the future that you really hone in on.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Totally
I think that's just like a personal anecdote from my experience. I mean, one of our things at Kinetic is like industry education. And it definitely took me a little while to fall into that particular niche. I mean, if you look at some of my earlier content, I've got stuff about like my home gym in my garage. We got my kids on there, like building Legos and stuff like that. So it took me some trial and error, but yeah, I really like how you phrased that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If I could just add in real quick, when I first started FreightCaviar, it was actually called shipping pallets. And I've never thought of it as any form of business. It was just for fun. I just quit my job. I just had knee surgery, and I was laying on my bed. I'm like, I'm gonna try to get 10,000 followers. That was the goal, and I never ever thought that I would have a business out of it or have a huge following. But it transitioned over time. I went from posting really stupid stuff just to get people's attention to kind of cultivating a brand and changing my name along the way. And I think companies do the same thing, where when you first start, you're very scrappy. You kind of utilize everything you can. And then if you're successful, you have some money and you could reinvest that to create maybe a better image or invest into marketing to look better. But as Blythe said about this guy, that he wants to have everything figured out. It's like that's the last thing that you should be thinking about right now. Just start right now, do something, create some content, get it out there, and then it's going to develop along the way.
Yeah. I love that.
I was going to say, doing something is always going to be better than doing nothing.
Facts.
Right? If you just sit there doing nothing, there's going to be no progress whatsoever.
You figure it out along the way, because if you're trying to figure out everything at once, there's no way that 5-year plan is going to go ahead the way you want it to go. It's going to change up depending on the circumstances that get thrown at you. So,
the fear of perfection is like everybody's biggest hurdle. Like if you wait until it's perfect to post something or create something, then you've waited too long.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that imposter syndrome definitely, comes into that. So let's dive into that part a little bit. And I want to follow up with you, Paul, on this, because you're mentioning like this trial and error, type of thing, right? Like we're always learning, we're just kind of trying things. So, as you've built FreightCaviar, right? Like, when we were talking, a couple of days ago, you said like, yeah, I'm still learning. And, I said, that's so cool to hear, because there's people that would look at the FreightCaviar brand and be like, oh, dude, that guy must have some knowledge that like I don't have. And like, right. So can you dive into a little bit of that line of like, as you're building a brand, like what are some of the things that you have to trial and error? And then like, how do you make it recognizable and like meaningful? Right.
Sure. So actually heard this on like Gary Vee, but I hear it all the time. It's about like starting really niche and then branching out. Kind of. Well, for me, like I started just doing, I guess, completely just like freight broker stuff. And then if you could just real quickly repeat part of the question, just so like I don't go on a tangent.
Yeah.
Right now, yeah. Sorry.
No, so like give us a peer behind the curtain to like what some of that trial and error looks like, and how you turn that into something that's like recognizable and meaningful, right? Like the output on the other end.
Definitely. So what I first focused on was just memes. Absolutely memes. It's like the only thing, something humor related, nothing else. And when I started getting some traction there, I think I started the podcast like 10 months after I started like the actual memes. And I was like, I have all these people reaching out to me. They're liking my memes. I might as well just connect with the industry to learn from them. And for me, it was more or less like I never planned this in the beginning, right? Like we mentioned earlier, this was just kind of everything. Like I have ideas that I come up with along the way. And so like, I guess for the process is just to be really in it. I don't know, like it's difficult to say more, but it's I keep having continuous ideas like what I want FreightCaviar to be, and I keep on working on it. And I keep what I would say to anyone is just to connect with the industry, especially like for me, it was really easy to connect with the industry because I already had people following me through FreightCaviar, and I was like, let's just start talking to these people. So I think it's a process, and it's all about, I would say definitely just be really niche in the beginning, and then you could eventually branch out to where I have supposedly a pretty large following from European logistics on my LinkedIn, because I had a few posts go viral, and I look at these people and they're like working in Poland and Germany and Netherlands, and it's like, it's pretty cool. Like I never ever imagined I would have anyone from the European industry following me. So
that's cool. Yeah, I like that. So a question to both of you. You know, this through line of imposter syndrome, right? What are some of the ways that you guys try to break imposter syndrome? Like when you feel that creeping in, right? We're trying new things. We're doing some trial and error. Are there anything that like, are there people that you reach out to? Is there like a method you have to try to like break that imposter syndrome down? I guess we'll start with you, Blythe.
It's tough. I mean, especially when because I've been in the logistics world for a while, but I was never a broker. So I didn't know, especially firsthand, a lot of how, until I started, covering content for FreightWaves, I never understood sort of the nuances. And I still don't really understand a lot of the nuances among just the greater supply chain. And it took me a while to sort of get out of, I guess, the wanting to be seen as like this businesswoman and really embracing the fact that I don't know a lot of this stuff. And I think that educational journey is just sort of it's something that a lot of us in freight go through, because there are brokers that I talk to that they don't know anything about, being a driver. Drivers don't really know anything about being a broker. So sharing that educational experience among the different fragments of the logistics and just supply chain industry overall, I think coming to a place where I can embrace that I don't know as much as I like to think that I know, and then sharing that insight. I have a series that I've been editing for TikTok that explains like super basic stuff that I think a lot of people understand. Like, where did the term drayage come from? Ryan Peterson, CEO of Flexport, he broke this down on an episode of Odd Lots, and I just found that so fascinating that there are these different phrases for this historic industry that have been around for so long. So for me, like, it's really just been about embracing what I don't know and then sharing that insight with other people. Because I think that from a marketing perspective, there are a lot of folks in my same exact shoes where they don't know anything about freight, and they get hired on at a job and they're supposed to know all the nuances of this industry, and they don't. And so I think embracing what I don't know has really helped over the last, couple of years.
That's awesome. Yeah, it sounds like that's definitely like a freeing thing to just say, like, okay, cool. Now I get to ask questions.
Right. Teach me.
Yeah.
Stay curious.
Yeah, that's really cool. What about for you, Paul?
For me, I guess I'm not afraid of looking bad, or maybe looking kind of like maybe like I don't know what I'm talking about, because I'm trying to get at bats at everything I do, because I know like I've seen my continuous improvement throughout my life. Like the first phone calls I made as a freight broker were awful. Like I was anxious. I was just really bad at communicating stuff. And then throughout the years, I just got really good at it. And I was really comfortable with talking to people. And like, I remember like my first podcast, I was like really anxious and nervous. I'm like, all right, these are just the at bats, right? So like, and I don't really care what anyone thinks about me. I like myself. So it's like, I don't like it, whatever I put out there that people don't like. It's like, that's great. And even like to build on that, like I've learned to really like people like that, like sometimes do hate on me or whatever that the case might be. Like, even though I have a lot of people that like me, but at the end of the day, it's like, I'm just having fun, and I'm
That's awesome.
on this I'm on this adventure, and I'm learning through it, and I'm developing myself. So
to me, so like Paul, a lot of what like resonates with me from your content is similar to how I kind of approach things personally. It's similar to Blythe's too, but like I approach it more of like leaning really heavily into what I do know, like while also embracing what I don't know. Like I don't know anything about marketing or branding. Like this is Zach's expertise, but I know a lot about logistics, and I lean heavily into like operational brokerage. And to me, like your content strikes a chord with me because of how well you clearly know the brokerage arena, and it comes through in your content.
So I think there's like an important element too that I think like we're kind of circling around, right? Like we can be experts in a space, but we can also still be like learners in another space. And the more that you can like live into both of those and like your identity and like where you're at in that journey, while also leveraging like networking and just saying like, hey, like I'm not the expert in that, but like here's this person, right? Like it becomes such a freeing exchange. Like, and I almost feel like we've seen some of that uncover like in the past years as it relates to, you know, new content entering in, or like even marketing and the understanding of that. So it's really cool. So on that same line, right? So let's dive a little bit into the content marketing side, okay? Because I feel like as people have learned a little bit more about marketing, or even, you know, brokers and freight tech companies have experimented with marketing, content marketing has like a new light that's shed on it. So, you know, Blythe, I'd like to ask, you know, what are some of the things that when people are approaching content marketing, what parts of their brand or brand identity should they be considering when they're approaching a content marketing strategy?
I would say first and foremost, talk to your customers, and not in the, you know, where's my load, or, you know, it was delivered, not in that lens, but what were you struggling with before you picked up the phone and became a customer of ours, or we began working together. And I think that is a fundamental place where not just, you know, freight companies, but just companies in all industries, they would just be so much better served if they talk to their customers and on a regular basis. You know, the companies that are doing this now, they're knowing the verbiage. You know, we kind of hinted at it earlier, but the language barrier, the acronyms, and the things that go on and are said in this industry, especially for a newcomer, can be really challenging. And just think how challenging it is on the customer side of things, who doesn't get all the jargon that is being used on a regular basis. And so by having those customer conversations, then what you're doing is you're getting those real world, you know, I have what's called a Lingo Library, where every time I'm on a sales call, I will write down, or I'll type out the exact verbiage of what my prospects are using. And they'll say, you know, what does my website have SEO? And so those kind of questions that are just a no-brainer to me, I know that I can use that verbiage, that exact sentence on my website, in my marketing copy, social media, you know, any kind of content planning in the future. I can use that exact verbiage, because then I'm speaking in the language that the prospect is speaking. And then I can relay that, because if they're using that same information that they're speaking to me, then likely other people are doing so as well. So I think that talking to your customers is one of the, hands down, the most important things that you can do before you even think about coming up with a content marketing strategy, because then those conversations that you have are going to affect your website. And if you don't have your website dialed in to where you're collecting leads on the site itself, then you're going to waste a lot of time and a lot of energy on content marketing and advertising that just won't convert.
Yeah, I mean, it's super important, to think through the funnels or the customer journey rather, right? Like that's somebody's going to be going down. So yeah, I mean, super valuable input there. Paul oh, go ahead, man. Yeah.
I just want to build on that because like Blythe talked about talking to customers. I talk to my followers to see like what they want and what kind of questions they want me to ask in the podcast, like stuff like that. Yes. So utilizing that network is so powerful.
Yeah. So I mean that was going to be my exact question. So like, you're a very content forward brand, right? So like, outside of just, looking at, DMs or like sending somebody a DM or like asking them directly, are there mechanisms that you guys, use in, marketing tools, let's say, that can help you do that? Like, is it engagements, impressions? Like what are some of the other tools that you guys are utilizing to really hear your audience? Let's start with you, Paul.
What tools am I utilizing?
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. I used to really care about like engagement. I used to always check like all that stuff. And nowadays, I don't know. I probably just don't have time to actually like really care. I just like, if I have something and I want to post it, I post it. And I guess for the longest time, I used to check it all the time. How many followers do I have? How many likes do I have? How many comments? And nowadays it's like, it's just information overload where it's like, I don't even have time to look over that kind of stuff. But it is what you could realize though is like, if you're posting different types of content, you can see what's more engaging, and then you could try to replicate that. Like a few days ago, like I had a video of me asking people questions in Santa Monica Beach.
Loved it.
Yeah, and that one did really well for like a video of mine asking people, and I'm like, this is great. Like I'm gonna have to do more of these. So I even had like the senior director of logistics at Walmart reshare that. So like, in terms of just like potential customers for Warp, or like, this is just perfect. And so like, that's why I think it's important to see what works and what doesn't. Like if you're posting something that is getting very little engagement and you keep repeating that, it's probably best to focus on something else. I was actually listening to a podcast today, really good podcast. It's a daily marketing podcast. It's super short, but it was talking about how like Gary Vee always talks about putting out content no matter what every day. But this guy's like, yeah, that's fine, but don't, like, if you see that something's not working, don't continuously put it out. Like you got to change something up. You can't, don't put out the same bad video every time. It's not gonna get more engagement next time. Try to figure out what's gonna work. And so it's all about, if you're gonna look at engagements, figure out which posted well and try to create more content related to that.
Yeah, love that. Is there anything that you're using from your side, Blythe, like tools wise, that you're like, oh man, really hold on to this, like in terms of my iterative process or what have you?
Well, I will say that one of the best, I think, creators that's on LinkedIn and really Twitter too is a guy named Justin Welsh. If any of you guys are not following him already, go follow. He's an instant follow. But he drops so many different gems. And one of the things he was talking about the other day was all the tools that he uses, because he tries to, through some of his messaging, he tries to not use as many tools, because there's so many tools out there for marketing. And you can get, to Paul's point, you can get overwhelmed by too much data. And so you have to make sure that the data that you're getting is actionable. And one of the tools, speaking of Justin Welsh, that he mentioned the other day is Shield Analytics, which is a LinkedIn analytics provider for your personal account. A lot of analytics tools out there really only focus on the business page, and the business page will just never have as much engagement as your own personal page. You can get it to where it's a good place, but it's just not realistic, I think, for a lot of company pages to make it there. So, utilizing your personal pages and this kind of insight that I get, the posts that have done really well. I mean, I'm on like the trial period right now, but I already know over the last year which posts have performed the best, got the most comments. I can click on them immediately. And then knowing that insight, you also have to play a role with or not play a role, but know how the algorithm plays a role in your marketing as well. Because the people that saw whatever you posted, there's a good portion of them that did not see that post. So what Justin Welsh preaches and what I'm going to start experimenting with is after once a month, he will sit down and look at the top performing posts from 3 months ago. And then he'll take those same posts and he'll reiterate on them, or he'll just straight up just slightly tweak the same exact post and then just schedule it again for that coming month. So when you're thinking of it from the lens of, okay, well, I need to post on LinkedIn every day. That's 30 posts, give or take. And I can pick from, the 10 top performing posts from 3 months ago. Most people are not going to remember that post from 3 months ago because nobody remembers your content like you do. And so taking those top 10 performing posts, you can load them in to the upcoming month, knowing that the majority of your audience probably didn't see those posts. They already performed pretty well. Yeah. And so I think that finding tools like that, like Shield Analytics, is one of those things where it's like, okay, well, this is a tool that can make my marketing actionable. I think there's too many marketing tools out there that just are a bunch of noise and they don't help with what you should post and what is working the best and what's working the least. So you can do more of what works and do less of, what doesn't.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. Like tools that inform like your next step, right? Like those are always some of the best tools, right? It takes away some of that, critical thinking or thinking in the moment or overthinking or overanalyzing, and just says, all right, let's find these patterns. And then we just start replicating that. So I love that. And so yeah, Shield Analytics, great, great applicable. That's awesome.
Should have an affiliate deal with them or something.
Yeah, there we go. Okay.
It's a missed opportunity.
I mean, I'll say like that. I read that quote that you said a while ago about nobody remembers your content like you remember your content. And I started doing exactly what you said. Like I'll go through my past posts over the past several months. And just like you suggested, I'll see what performed well. I'll kind of iterate them a little bit, throw them back up there, and lo and behold, they perform well again. So it's like the secret trick that people are using that I had no idea about.
And then that's one of the bigger intimidation factors is people sit down on the computer and they know that it's important, but they don't know what to talk about. So if you just spend, a couple hours each month just working through that process, then you could have the majority of your content written out and on autopilot.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing how well that actually does work.
Definitely.
The next question we had here kind of ties together two separate concepts. So you've got branding and then you've got marketing. And Blythe, I'll throw this at you. Like, how does your branding relate to your marketing strategy?
I think it's all interconnected. I don't really think of them as separate. I think of my marketing is, having those customer conversations. What do they want to know from me? And then that drives everything else that, not really drives, everything that I want to be known for, but it's that tight, it's almost like a Venn diagram where like questions that people are asking me, things that I want to be known for, and then, where the business is going in the future. So I try to use like that Venn diagram perspective into, having my content buckets, and this is what I'm going to talk about. But then I still leave room for myself to be a little personal at times, and share some behind the scenes, because I feel like that also helps, to create more relatability. I had a post that, a lot of people were interested in relative to me, not relative to like Paul's account, because he just gets massive engagement on all of his stuff. But for me, this was a really good one about my YouTube studio and a box kit. I think there are a lot of creators out there, like us, that are one-person operations, and we don't have the budget for a full production studio or to be able to rent booth space at a conference. It's just us. And I think that that's what helped people resonate with that. So for a lot of my marketing, some of it has shifted to how do I help who I was, 10 years ago when I was an assistant at, a 3PL office. What did I want to know? What did I need help with? And so that's where an example of how, maybe that wasn't messaging in the beginning for digital dispatch, but it is now. And it's a stronger focus because of it, because of all of the different, sort of industry things that are going on, great resignation, possible recession in the future. How are these one-person marketing teams going to survive? And so that's what I want to help, is those one-person marketers in freight. So I try to just walk that tightrope balance and use a Venn diagram really of what my customers and prospects are asking, and then what do I want to be known for?
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. All right, wild card question here, but I think it's interesting, like hearing you say, okay, 10 years ago, I was an EA at a 3PL, to now, and like you have this passion for, helping those like one person marketing teams, right? So it kind of makes me think, like, is there anything from both of your guys' perspectives that you still see as like a really green pasture in our space? Like you made a post, like I think it was yesterday, and I was like, oh man, we're still only scratching the surface. So like, are there any areas that you guys see as like, man, this could be really cool, and like this could be something that a brand could fill or a content creator could fill? Like, is there anything that comes to mind like daily, like in that realm?
I'll go ahead real quick.
Yeah.
I definitely think like just like from the media aspect of logistics, covering it in like a different angle, or I was actually thinking about it. So there's like transport topics, CCJ, freight waves, and I feel like there's still like a lot of room for, because like besides freight waves, other like media providers in logistics have been out for like a pretty long time, and they have like a niche audience, either drivers or maybe like an older population in like the 3PL world. But I feel like there's like a massive, and that's like what I've been trying to hit on with FreightCaviar, is like really get with the freight brokers and the dispatchers and the truck drivers that just kind of want more like humor and like kind of light content. So I think there's a lot of, and there's also a lot of room for just like a personal brand, like the Freight Coach, or I mean, Blythe with Cyberly. There's a lot of room for personal brands, and companies like it, like to work with personal brands. So I think there's a lot of room for that, because the industry is so big, and there's like, as long as you're well connected and you have like your own brand, I think there's for that there's a lot of room still.
Love that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think there's only like 60 type like freight style podcasts that are out there. When you compare that to really like any other industry, there's a lot of stories that can be told. And, I think it sort of goes back to Zach, your point earlier that, with collaboration over competition, like there's plenty of room for all of us to sit at the table and to have these different conversations, because the beauty about freight is that it's always evolving and it's always changing, and telling those stories, they need to be told more often. It's only within the last couple of years that supply chain has really gone quote unquote mainstream, where I have friends who have never known what I do for a living are asking me about what's going on at the ports. And I'm like, hell if I know. They don't even know what's going on at the ports either. So it's one of those things where it's like, we need more voices in this space to understand where their stuff comes from and where it's sourced and how it arrives there. I think people just, for so long, the overwhelming majority of the population has just, assumed that it was a very simple process. But there's all those different stories that can be told for sort of the greater awareness of the masses. Because, even working inside of a logistics company, I just sort of admitted that I didn't really know what a lot of different roles were back in my early days of marketing. And I didn't really prioritize learning about those roles, and I should have. Now just put that on steroids with the majority of the population who has no idea how any of this works. So there's so much room for more stories to be told and more experiences. And I think it's just, like you said, Zach, we're barely scratching the surface.
Yeah. So good. All right. So let's dive back into, kind of this branding side of things, right? So we've talked a little bit about personal branding. We've talked about branding, like in general. So I want to ask a question that, kind of hits at like the bridge between those two. So I think it's interesting because, both of you guys are kind of bridging a gap between, like, you have a personal brand that you are managing and like putting out there and like producing content and pushing that into the world. But then you're also part of a team with their own brand identity that probably has, founders that have identity mixed into it, that has their own voice. So how do you guys, balance the content production of both your personal brand and, a company brand, and keep that fresh and keep that exciting between those two?
Who wants to go first?
I can go ahead.
I would say repurposing your distribution of your content and repurposing of what you want your brand to be known for and what you want to be known for. There's a lot of synergies there, and you can repurpose, whatever's working on your personal profile, I'm starting to repurpose to my business profile, because I've spent so long building my personal profile that I've let my business, especially like on LinkedIn, I've let the business profile just sort of be stagnant, just sort of, sit there, not doing much with it. So now I'm in the process of, okay, I feel like my personal brand is in a good place. So now we need to hone in on the company brand as well. And so that's, it's again, walking a tightrope, but I would not be scared to use user-generated content, meaning if you have drivers or employees that are already making content out there, it is such a no-brainer to help them as sort of be your internal brand ambassadors. Reuse the content with their permission, of course. Reuse their content that's already performing well. Use it on your own company profile as long as it fits within what you want your brand buckets to be. I think that that's a huge missed opportunity, especially from the driver situation. Drivers have hands down the best social media in this industry, and they are highly underutilized when it comes to influencer deals, when it comes to sponsorships. And speaking of scratching the surface, like these guys and gals have hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram, on YouTube, on Twitter, on TikTok, all of these different platforms that you're trying to reach. And what better way to reach them by connecting with them on their own platform or their own audience. And so I think that there's still so much room to grow, but repurposing and the distribution of that content is vital.
Yeah. Wow, I love that. Paul, how do you approach that balance between the two?
Okay, Zachary, can you just real quick also repeat the question? I'm sorry, it's 10 p.m. out here. I've been up for like 14 hours in jet lag. If you could just, I just want to answer it properly without, so real quick, if you could just ask me that question.
Yeah, of course. So you guys represent, right, a personal brand. So like, let's say FreightCaviar, right? That's kind of a personal brand, but then you're also part of producing content and pushing content for like a company brand, like Warp, right? So how do you balance those two and, keep it fresh and keep it exciting for that content that you're in charge of, producing?
Sure. So for FreightCaviar, like absolute freedom, whatever I want, I can post on it. With Warp, as I usually have to talk to Troy, who's kind of like, he's like my manager. So there I get rejections. Like I would say like, it's like 50%, maybe lower of like the stuff that I send him, he like approves. So like today I sent him a video that like we like spent 2 hours on, like Derek and I, like my videographer, were still like 2 hours on. He was like, absolutely not. We're not posting this. I'm like, all right. Well, like that was 2 hours wasted. But I mean, in my opinion, like it's a cool video, but obviously it's his company. So it's kind of his vision. He's got a different vision for it, which I respect, like I'm not like, but for FreightCaviar, it's, I mean, repurposing is definitely great. Like, so when I can't come up with like a meme, and I see like a funny meme from like there's a lot of freight meme pages on Instagram. I'll just take it and I'll tag the person who made it, and they're always so happy when I tag them because they get like hundreds of followers, and they're like message me, thanks for tagging me, thanks for reposting this, and for me it's like there's so much good content out there. If you could just be a curator of like putting it together, just showcasing it to people, like people are going to appreciate that, and that's why even like there's so much content created in logistics. If you don't even have to create content. If you're just able to take the most interesting content, or I guess it's all relative, but if you could just take whatever is most interesting to you and put it out there, people are going to be attracted to that just because then you could be the filter of content, right? Like literally, if you have a good judgment of what's good and what's bad, and with this industry being so big, people are gonna, But in terms of differentiating, for my personal stuff, I usually just put more like personal, like maybe conversations. Like FreightCaviar is more like, it's a little bit different than my personal stuff. Sometimes I reshare it. I don't really have like a process that I follow. I just kind of like know which one goes where. So
that's freeform. But I think like what I like that you guys are both hitting on, right? Like there's kind of a balance between like content production, but then also content curation, right? How do you curate content that's appropriate for the audience, even if it is repurposed or just tagging another channel, right? Still hearing your audience and being able to curate content that they're going to like respond to is still super powerful. So yeah, that's great. Awesome. Okay. So getting to kind of the last couple questions here. So are there examples, from your guys' perspective of like some of your like favorite branding right now that's like going on in the industry, right? Again, like this is such a concept for some like in the industry that it's so new, right? Like even being able to like use these words and like definitions of branding. So like what are some of those like fun examples for you guys that, you know, come to mind when you're like, man, that's a really cool brand and like they're putting out some cool stuff?
Oh, I think hands down right now, FreightCaviar is killing it.
Mm,
I think all of their, you know, they sort of exploded out of, you know, nowhere to me, really over like the last, you know, sort of handful of months. But really, if you look at like their LinkedIn profiles, they all have like the similar like yellow background from their logo. They're all, you know, sort of commenting on each other's posts, and that helps engagement. They're actively out there, you know, connecting with other folks and, you know, volunteering themselves to, you know, be on different podcast episodes and, you know, videos and shows and things like that. They are putting themselves out there. And I think from a branding perspective, they're just knocking it out of the park. So you know, FreightCaviar comes to mind. I would also say, you know, Charlie Safro, with her recruiting firm, I think, you know, comes to mind as well. Obviously, you know, Freight Coach Chris Jolly is a big one as well. Those are just the ones that I can think of, you know, sort of off the top of my head. But those are all just, you know, great examples to follow, especially from like a broker perspective.
Yeah. Those are some, like really good examples. And like, it's cool. Like the FreightCaviar example, right? Like they're having fun doing that, right?
Mhm.
You can tell that they're just being genuinely like who they are.
Right.
Like from meeting them in person to seeing their content's like, oh, like that's them. So it's really cool to see those brands, you know, come to the surface.
And that would be a place that like most folks would see that content and want to go work there. Like think of how many companies are struggling right now with recruiting and with talent retention. And right now their content is probably working for them whenever they don't necessarily have to work. It's working, you know, that 365, 24/7.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Like I would say that really any broker right now who's leveraging content that way jumps out to me immediately. I mean, FreightCaviar, of course, Sage Freight. I see their videos up on LinkedIn periodically. They jump out at me, and like the bar. I don't want to say the bar is so low because it sounds bad because like those brokers are doing a really good job, but there are so few doing it. To me, whoever is doing it immediately jumps out.
100%. I posted a photo about socks. Freight socks, and people, I'm now getting sent socks from different freight companies and conferences. And I'm like, this is what, if I tried to do this in like sports or entertainment, it would ghost town. But you know, in freight, it works. So take advantage of all of these different opportunities that are out here right now.
That's so cool.
I like socks. I should do that.
I can't wait to start my my freight karaoke 3-line just for you.
Boo.
Awesome. Anything that jumps out to you, Paul?
I guess a lot of things jump out to me. I'm like definitely FreightCaviar is crushing it, and it was cool to hang out with them at TIA with the team out there. I mean, there's definitely a few in mind. I don't want to like, I don't know. I'm just gonna like give a shout out to people that like companies that utilize me for branding or marketing, just because I think the ones that do like see like the FreightCaviar potential, see kind of like the millennial like population, like the Barstool sports population, like it's kind of like a different way, a different approach. It's not the professional way as LinkedIn has always been, right? So definitely want to give a shout out to Ascend TMS because Tim Hyam, like he wanted to sponsor me from like the get go, and he loved what I was doing. So I think that's cool for him, and he does a really good job of really like getting the information out there. Like everyone seems to know Ascend TMS, freetms.com. Then also Ryan from TextLocate. He was one of the first people that messaged me on Instagram back in August. He's like I want you to like, you know, I want to be your sponsor. Yeah, TextLocate. I got the TextLocate right here.
Nice.
And then I mean, on top of that, I think there's some trucking companies that do well on Instagram, but they're not really on LinkedIn. I feel like trucking companies don't really like. There's a few trucking companies on LinkedIn, but for some reason they don't really like. They don't spend that much time on there as like freight brokers and like people that in the freight tech industry do.
Yeah.
So
There you go. Green pasture right there. So hopefully we see some of that come to the surface in the coming year as we continually evolve. So with that, so we do a segment just to cover some hot words and phrases in the industry, right? So as our industry evolves, it's always an interesting thing to see the through lines and how language also evolves, right? So Nick and I joke often like words like visibility, right? Like it comes to the surface and everyone uses it. And then at some point you ask like, what does visibility actually mean anymore? And what should it mean, right? So to close our segment in our session today on branding, we're going to be throwing some hot words and phrases with you. And I have two buckets here. So there's some freight buzzwords that I want to ask you guys like, hey, give me your 30 to 45 second. What does it mean? What should it mean? And then we also have marketing brand words where same thing. Let's do 30 to 45 second quick definition. What should it mean? And then that's how we're going to kind of close out the segment. Does that sound good to you guys?
Let's do it.
All right, here we go. We're going to kind of try to do these rapid fire. So let's start with the marketing one. So Blythe, starting with you, growth hacking. This is one that pops up so often. I think especially like in the tech startup world, we're diving into some growth hacking. What does that even mean?
I more lean to like the latter part of that word, and that's your hack. I just don't believe in these. When I think of growth hacking, I think of almost like the fake gurus that are promoting like, the Lamborghini lifestyle and earn six figures with working 2 hours a day. That's how I think of like growth hacking and, the content that sort of arrives around it. Content is hard and you have to work at it. You have to get your at-bats, as Paul said, and there's really no way to hack that system. So when folks call themselves like growth hackers, I mean, no offense to anybody who does out there, but I kind of call bullshit.
There you go. I love it. Good. That's a good start. All right, Paul, one for you. Content is king. We hear this one too. Like, hey, content is king. You gotta have a lot of content. What does that mean to you?
Content is king. Well, a lot of people tend to associate like they just like put out content no matter what. I don't know. I prefer the quality over quantity approach, where no one wants to see bad content. I mean, bad content could have its advantages, where like you might be known for bad content, and then people might be like, let's see what kind of bad content this person put out today, kind of thing. Or it might work.
The hate
somehow,
follows.
Right? Yeah. But I mean, you definitely have to be posting content. It's definitely overused. I would say content. I don't know. It's a funny thing. Content is king. Who even made that up. Like,
it's just it's a platitude, right? I think you hit the nail on the head. It's a throwaway thing.
Mm-hmm.
Quality, do your thing. That's good. You gave us what we needed, Paul. That's awesome. All right, Blythe, this one is 100% yours. This is your passion. Content marketing. What's the definition? Like, shed some light on that for us.
Content marketing is creating content online that you care about, that you want to know about, or what you care about, what you want your customers to know about you, and that ultimately drives business results.
Love it.
Because otherwise it's a hobby if you're just making content without the goal of ultimately, building an audience and then monetizing that audience, whatever ethical or unethical way that you deem appropriate.
There you go. Well said. All right, here's one for both of you. We're going to dive into the freight buzzwords bucket now. Okay. This is one of my favorite because I think I see this a ton on LinkedIn, especially, but it's I don't know, it's all over the place. Tech enabled. It gets tossed everywhere. So what is a tech enabled broker? What should tech enabled mean? Like truly, let's start with you, Blythe, and then we'll move to Paul.
When I hear tech enabled, I just think that you have a TMS and you have tracking ability. So that's ultimately like what you need to operate your business, and then what your customers want from you. So as long as you have those two things, I think, that qualifies as tech enabled. Sort of a meh word in my opinion. Like use software to help you figure out how to say that differently.
I don't think there's a freight broker out there that's not tech enabled, you know. So you know, maybe 20 years ago, tech enabled would be like a sexy buzzword to throw around at a customer, but tech enabled, yeah. I mean, people like, especially when you're a young freight brokerage and you're scrappy, you try to like put all these buzzwords in just to make your company sound better. But I would definitely, if anyone's starting a freight brokerage right now or considering it or using it right now, like tech enabled, I mean, it doesn't mean anything. Like you're not differentiating yourself.
Yeah.
With
just list the tech that you actually use and cut the buzzwords.
Exactly.
Feels a little light. One of my favorite things, we did an episode with Grace Sharkey, and she said, you know, Excel spreadsheet, that's technology. So if you're using Excel spreadsheet, you're tech enabled.
Right. Do you have a cell phone? You are tech enabled.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. That's great. What about on the other side of this, shipper of choice? This was one that you threw out, Nick. Do you want to give any context to this one?
Yeah, I'll give context to shipper of choice. So to me, shipper of choice is one of those words that varies almost along with how the market changes. You know, when it's a tight market, shipper of choice, well, it means you really care about the drivers. It means you're trying to reduce detention times. It means you're doing everything you can to service those drivers. But when the market loosens up, I feel like it changes its meaning where it's used slightly differently. You know, all of a sudden there's tons of capacity. You have your choice among drivers, and it loses some of its meaning. So to me, it's a word that kind of changes along with how the market changes.
Yeah, love that. In that same line of thought, asset light, right? That's kind of another one that was, you know, brought up similar to shipper of choice. So who wants to take a stab at this one?
I'm going to attack it real quick. Asset light, I mean, so it's funny. Well, a lot of customers want you to have assets if you're going to come on, sign on, especially during this competitive market where there's so many freight brokerages that exist. And I mean, asset light for me just probably means that like you have probably like a third cousin or like someone, some good friend that has a few trucks that you could put like, oh, I have assets. In reality, it probably means that you don't have assets, but you have a really close friend that does have assets. So you put it out there because you want your customer to know that, or to think that you do have your own truck.
100%. That is 100%. Because I remember making a website for my old employer, and we started off with asset light, and he was very enthusiastic about using that word and that phrase. And then when we became asset based, which is ultimately the downfall of the company, go figure. But when we became asset based, I had to then go in and change all the verbiage and all of the different marketing materials to asset based.
Yeah, it's like, hey, I have a truck on my website. Does that count as asset light? Sure.
I love it. All right. Here's the last one that we're going to do. And I feel like a lot of times when I talk to brokers about marketing strategy, this one gets a lot of questions around. And I think you touched on this a little bit, Blythe. But SEO. What is SEO? Give us just our quick definition that we can all run away with.
Probably the most over-invested content marketing strategy in the modern day era. And I say all of that because it's a word salad, but SEO, in my opinion, gets way too much credit than ultimately what it rightfully deserves. Because if you are putting content out into the world, if you are advertising, if you're doing all the things, naturally what people do is they Google your company, and then they arrive on your website. And if they're ready to make a purchase or book a meeting, then SEO will get that credit in your marketing reports, when in reality, there are so many other factors that played a role. And ultimately, executives are making budgeting decisions based off of inaccurate data. I think SEO is important to a certain degree, but the amount of budget that is put to SEO, I think, would be much better spent on a real sort of content marketing plan by talking to your customers and doing video interviews and chopping those up and putting those out to social media. That's where I would spend my attention dollars and, money budgetary wise. So I think it's an overinvested part of marketing.
Love that.
I just want to add real quick, not to SEO, but all these buzzwords, like at some point might have been, cool and unique, but, they get overused because people like pick up on it like, oh, this is working for someone. I'm going to just take it. And then all of a sudden everyone's using it in the industry. So you're not being unique. If anything, I would just tell someone to create their own buzzword and just try to play along with it. So it's kind of like
But
how
it's
Ryan does on LinkedIn.
And it's also from an SEO perspective, I feel like, sort of freight has a long way to go. And I could speak on this for so much longer, but I'll cut it short. Like that is SEO is one of the questions that I get asked about the most, and that I have to explain that if you go to an SEO agency and invest thousands and thousands of dollars per month, you're not going to get that investment back. You have to diversify where you're investing and why. And SEO in particular is just, it was very good 10 years ago. Now we have software that can write up. I did it just the other day doing a test, 1,000-word blog article on freight marketing. And I have yet to publish it because it was generated by an AI software. And this is what's coming to the world of content, especially for those who don't feel comfortable making their own. Then they're going to start utilizing this software in order to make the same bland content over and over again, just trying to write for robots instead of writing for people. So that's my soapbox. And as long as you're making content for, people instead of robots, then that is the content strategy that you should be targeting.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, make it human. Understand your audience. Listen to them.
I've used an AI to create content, and I use a free week trial. I'm like, this is not like, I don't want to read this. This is so bland. This is like, you can tell it's a robot. And with every company having a blog that, is essentially the blog of the same thing. If you're going to have a blog and then SEO, you have to have like unique content with some buzzwords though. So but,
there you go.
You got to play the game somewhere.
Yeah. Sure. That's awesome. Exactly. All right. Well, thanks guys for giving us your thoughts on that and doing this little rapid fire game. So, I mean, there was just so many like through lines that I feel like we could take one of them and spend a couple hours on today. So, two of the things that I think I'm taking away, from today, right? That, we always want to get back to like applicables and what can a 3PL or freight tech or a trucking asset-based company, what can they take into the real world? So like two things that I really heard today from you guys is, number one, as we're approaching branding and shaping branding as companies, right? We have to listen to our audience to understand like, the content that they want and the hunger that's there, right? In order to fill a gap. And then the second part of that I think, really resonated from what you guys were saying was, not only listen to your audience, but you have to be willing to iterate and like get over that imposter syndrome and put stuff out there. So like, if there's anything that folks that are watching this I think this is the best invitation to just like, we need more in this space, right? I think we're all in agreement on that. So those were a couple of things that stuck out to me that I thought were really great. Nick, was there anything that stuck out to you today as a great takeaway?
I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I think the biggest thing for me was the idea that like you have to be doing something. I mean, there is definitely imposter syndrome. There's definitely some reluctance to get out there, but there are so few people like in this industry putting out content and building their own brands and their company brands that anything you do is at least a step in the right direction. It's hugely important for everybody to get on board with it, like if they want to succeed in the industry.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, good deal. So that is going to wrap us up today. Blythe, Paul, thank you guys so much for taking part. This was a really cool conversation, and I hope that we can continue chatting and maybe even do a second episode as our space evolves. Maybe there's going to be some cool stuff that we can chat about in the future. But Paul, where can people check you out? Where can people catch you and the content that you're putting out?
Follow me on LinkedIn, FreightCaviar, Instagram @FreightCaviar. Everything else is like for YouTube, Spotify, all this stuff, info's in there. So
awesome. Good deal. And Blythe, where can people catch you?
Everything is logistics.com. I just made my own like sort of link tree to list all of the things that I do. So it's like a one-page super simple website, but it has Cyberly on there. It has a Digital Dispatch podcast on my socials. That's sort of the home for all of the content that I make. So everything is logistics.com.
Man,
that's amazing. Great domain.
Great domain. Good deal. Well, thank you guys for everything today. Again, this was Logistics of Marketing, the branding episode. We'll be pushing out little clips from this episode. And for our listeners and for our audience, if there's anything that you want to hear, that you want to dive into deeper, we'd love to hear that. And we'd love to talk about it and bring perspectives around these really important topics in our space. So with that, have a great afternoon. See ya.